What's up, guys? Henry Gracie, Hito and Gracie here at the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Academy World Headquarters, Torrance, California. By now, most of you have heard about the incident that took place in New York last week. Very unfortunate incident. We get a lot of requests for Gracie breakdowns when professional fights happen and UFC fights and different altercations and incidences happen. But never have we gotten so many requests for a breakdown or an analysis or at least an opinion on an incident as we have gotten for this incident surrounding a man by the name of Eric Garner who actually died after being arrested by New York Police Department officers.
And many requests from civilians and also police officers.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were on the fence regarding whether or not to make an analysis and to even weigh in on the situation because it is such a touchy subject. A man did lose his life. A family of 6 children and a wife lost a loved one, and and we lost a fellow human being in a way that could have possibly been avoided. So naturally, our concern is we don't want to offend the viewers, whether civilians, law enforcement, or anyone in between. But what we concluded was that there is so much to take away from this incident. In terms of tactical takeaway, in terms of what we might suggest someone do differently or additionally going forward to prevent a situation like this from happening again. And knowing that, we concluded that it would be worth making the video and seeing if we can't shed some light, especially in the category that we qualify to speak on, which is the actual tactical execution of the arrest and the events that ensued.
And one thing to be very clear is that we were not there.
Absolutely.
Right? We were not the police officers on the scene, and we're not obviously the civilians that were on the scene. So we don't know what was happening. We saw the video. Right. We don't know the energy.
We know as much as everybody else.
We don't know the past. So keeping that in mind, give us some slack.
Yeah, and like everyone else, we are very upset, frustrated, and saddened by the fact that we lost another person in an incident that kind of came about based on a man who was supposedly selling, loosely untaxed cigarettes. It seems like something so small led to such a great loss. And, yes, there was, an arrest and a man who was, supposedly resisting arrest, and then it evolved and some techniques that were used, and all that together led to a man losing his life. And in that sense, we feel like it was far too much a price to pay for far too small of a violation, so to speak. And that does frustrate us. But on the other hand, we know that an investigation is underway, and that until a full investigation has been done regarding the actual causes of death and the actual incidents leading up to the actual video that was filmed. And I know the video does show several minutes prior, but we don't know what's happened before that, previous record, previous history. We don't know. You guys might know more than we do. But until the full investigation has been completed, and we've had a chance to review that, we're not going to pass judgment on the officers. We're not going to pass judgment on Eric for his resisting the arrest and the way that he did. So we don't know. We don't know, and in that sense, we're not going to. This video is not about the right and wrong per se in terms of decisions and judgment of the officers and the individuals involved in the incident. However, as professional martial arts instructors specializing in a martial art that is heavily based on submission holds, many of which are based on attacking the neck and neck restraints, vascular neck restraints, rear naked chokes, choke holds, call them what you want. As specialists with each over 20 years of experience in these arts, or in this art, we feel that we do have an opinion that matters and an opinion that will shed some light on what we took away from the video. Anything that we show, any contingencies, any recommendations, any techniques that we kind of go over are not saying that the officers in the situation woulda, shoulda, coulda, so to speak. It's more trying to use this as a case study so that future officers in similar situations can have more tools, more resources, and maybe, if nothing else, a slightly better understanding of the techniques that were used and could be used and the ramifications of their use. I think that that's really what we're after and what we can accomplish with this first and foremost.
We're teachers, so we're here to teach.
Right. Now, For those of you who have not seen the actual video, the actual incident, we're going to run it now. And supposedly the man, Eric Garner, 6'5", 350 pounds, actually died, based on the medical examiner's report, actually died on the way to the hospital in the ambulance due to cardiac arrest. And we're going to show you the incident now, and then we'll talk about it after the fact.
Before that, take me back for what? I didn't sell anything. I did nothing. We sitting here the whole time, minding our business. What are you talking about? You watching do what? Who did I sell cigarette to? To whom?
Not that Richard. There's another guy.
Easy way or hard way for what? Every time you see me, you want to mess with me. I'm tired of it. This stops today.
This guy right here is forcibly trying to lock somebody up for breaking up a fight.
Everybody standing here, they told you I didn't do nothing. I did not sell nothing. Because every time you see me, you want to harass me, you want to stop me, trying to sell cigarettes. I'm minding my business, officer. I'm minding my business. Please just leave me alone. I told you the last time, please just leave me alone. Please, don't touch me. Don't touch me.
Hold on.
Don't touch me, please.
Came over.
Not touch me.
Damn.
Give your hand, buddy.
Put your hand behind your back.
I can't breathe. 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 I can't breathe.
Once again, police beating up on people.
Back up.
Right here.
Back up and get on that step.
Okay.
Back up.
All he did was break up a fight. And this is what happens for breaking up a fight. This is crazy.
Everybody back up, back up.
So as you saw there was a little bit of altercation, disagreement. The men wanted to place Eric under arrest. The officers wanted to place him under arrest. And he wasn't fighting back in the sense of striking at the officers, but he was, passively resisting the officers and not really cooperating with the arrest, to the point where one of the officers felt justified at the time in basically attacking his neck and taking him down with the rear neck restraint. Took the suspect down, and at that point, the suspect rolled over, and as we saw, he had the neck restraint and released the neck restraint, and then the suspect was saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And then, after some time, other officers came in to help, and then eventually, like I said, the suspect passes away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Now, the thing that we need to first talk about is how, the headlines everywhere and the media, immediately upon seeing the video, to an untrained eye especially, it's easy to say, New York man choked to death. We're here to say that based on 20 years of experience as professional jiu-jitsu instructors and defensive tactics instructors, we don't believe that the choke is what directly caused Eric Garner's death. And there are several reasons why we think this. And we want to start by kind of just introducing those people out there who are watching who really don't know anything about jiu-jitsu or about these neck restraints and the differences and what options there are. We want to kind of have a little discussion on what the possibilities are here. So to begin, the idea is there are two types of neck restraints. There are kind of air chokes, so to speak, and there are vascular, blood flow chokes or restraints that affect. Now the term choke is a little bit of is used in some confusing context, because choke, in its simplest definition, if you were to look up in the dictionary or something similar, basically means that the airway from the mouth or nose into the lungs is being obstructed, either by an object, if you choke on a piece of food, or you get your, in the case, in this situation, although this was verified that this didn't actually happen, but in a more violent context, there's other ways, which is if basically you bring your bar of your arm across someone's trachea, crushing the cartilage of the frontal neck anatomy here, that could cause inflammation to the point where the person cannot breathe, and then they could die from lack of oxygen intake, right? Because you actually crushed the trachea. So that would be considered an air choke. You're actually affecting their ability to take oxygen into the lungs. Blood restraints or blood chokes, so to speak, are those that restrict the blood flow to and from the brain, right? So the carotid arteries carry the blood into the brain, and then veins actually drain the blood out of the brain and back to the heart. And when you compress on the arteries and the veins of the neck, you're affecting the blood pressure in the brain. And at that point, the person goes unconscious. It triggers the vagus nerve. It's a safety mechanism. They go unconscious, and then they wake back up. Now, in this incident, it's pretty clear that the officer, when they come behind the neck, one thing we're very careful about when we teach any type of neck restraints is that the elbow of the officer be aligned with the chin of the suspect. Because by doing that, you're ensuring that the pressure is on the lateral, on the sides of the neck, which ensure more of a blood restriction, than in the front of the neck, which is more of a pressure on the throat and the trachea here in the front.
It's also more efficient.
Absolutely.
Right? To wrap and go for the carotid restraint.
Yeah, you get much greater results with much less energy when you actually, restrict the blood flow and affect the blood pressure in the brain and arrest and control the subject that way. Now, this idea of bringing the bar of the arm across the person's trachea, the reason it's dangerous is because if applied with too much force, it can cause inflammation to the trachea and the cartilage in the neck, which will obviously make it hard for the person to breathe and could, in fact, lead to someone's death. And has, over the many years, on few occasions, led to people's death. Now, the autopsy after the incident revealed that Mr. Garner's neck had no trauma and was not inflamed, and there was no damage to the frontal throat area, meaning the cartilage was not inflamed, and that's not what led to the death.
So it was almost used more as a headlock.
It was almost more of a control to bring the person down. And what's other very important indicator is that once the officer releases, and you can watch the video again to see, once the man is taken down and is compliant and is somewhat of a prone position, once Eric was somewhat of a prone compliant position, the officer released the neck. And immediately, Eric, who was conscious still, said, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." And come to find out, it was revealed that Eric also is asthmatic. So naturally, any type of high energy, tense, intense situation, not to mention, of course, in an arrest scenario like the one we witnessed, can definitely cause someone who's asthmatic to have breathing problems, no doubt. But just to be clear, he wasn't unconscious from the actual restraint on the neck, nor was the cartilage of his neck actually damaged to the extent that it would have caused the death, because the autopsy revealed that. So I guess what we're saying is that this technique, there's no evidence over many years. There have been many studies based on vascular neck restraints and their use in law enforcement, and all of the studies point to the fact that there's no evidence that when properly applied, the vascular neck restraint, right, with bilateral carotid artery compression and vein compression on the sides of the neck, there's no evidence that says that a properly applied vascular neck restraint is directly correlated to death or any serious lasting harm. However, properly applied being the key, term there, properly used, because there's no doubt that even a properly applied vascular neck restraint, right, which in the kind of common vernacular training in martial arts, in jiu-jitsu and in MMA, is called the rear naked choke. But it's obviously a misnomer because you're not actually plugging the airway when you do this. You are restricting the blood flow to and from the brain. So the term choke in the common martial arts arena does not mean plugging air, it means restricting blood flow. Now there's no doubt that if you restrict blood flow long enough, right, that it could cause, irreversible damage or death to a subject, right? It's natural. You go long enough without oxygenated blood to and from the brain, then you may die. However, when properly trained in the use of this technique and applying the bilateral, artery and vascular compression to the neck, this is not the case. It's a very safe, it's a very effective tactic, it's one that we've taught now in this Gracie Survival Tactics to law enforcement professionals and instructors for nearly 20 years, starting with our father and our uncles and now with us. And in all the teaching, and all the students, thousands of students and instructors we've ever certified, never once under our supervision or under our instruction, or in the field based on teachings from instructors that we've certified, has anyone ever had any permanent damage or death caused by a properly applied vascular neck restraint?
It's quite the opposite. It's actually saved officers.
Yes.
And it's in a way it almost protects
the suspect,
which is why if the officer does not have that, then the officer has to be a lot more aggressive.
So for us, and the way we teach it and the way we recommend it, is that this vascular neck restraint is definitely a less than lethal, an intermediate kind of hands-on force option for law enforcement to control subjects in a very safe, humane manner that reduces risk of injury for both the suspect and the officer. So for that, it's an incredible tool that, that we've seen. Now we know that due to the fear of improper application, or the other variable here is the pre-existing medical conditions, okay? And there's no doubt that someone who has a pre-existing medical condition, such as a cardiac condition, these individuals obviously are more prone to permanent injury or death from, you know, a vascular neck restraint or any type of neck restraint, but also any type of extraneous physical activity, period, right?
And I'm sure the officers, when seeing the suspect, when seeing Eric, I'm sure that if they knew and they could tell that he, you know, has
asthmatic or cardiac issues, right?
I'm sure they would have been more careful.
Right.
But they're looking at him, and with his size, 350 pounds, 6'5", they're thinking, wow, right now he's being, you know, he's being very calm. He's not attacking us. He's just, you know, passively resisting. But at any moment he could turn and attack us. So the headlock was a quick technique to control and bring him to the ground. Right. And that's just them thinking about their own safety, which we have to, you know, respect that the officers don't want to be injured.
Absolutely. And so the way we look at it is the vascular neck restraint is an incredible tool. And because its use has sometimes been happened at the same time as an unfortunate death in an arrest incident, does not mean it's any less of an effective tool. It just means there may have been other variables. And again, in all the incidences that in which someone died where a neck restraint was used, from as far as the research that I've seen, all of them had pre-existing medical conditions or other issues that also were variables in contributing to the death beyond simply the neck restraint that was used. And I think that what's happening, or what, you know, what we're concerned might happen with the vascular neck restraint, which we think is an incredible tool that has saved many lives and officers and suspects alike, what we're concerned is that similar to how, you know, in the 1980s, there have been people, since the 1980s, there have been people who have died in arrests that have taken place with pepper spray, with OC spray, with tasers. This doesn't mean the taser killed the person, it just means that the taser was used in the incident where the person, you know, who may have had, like we said, pre-existing medical conditions that were unaware or unknown to the officers, you know, triggered or led to that person's death. So it's a very sensitive issue, and what we're speaking up on is to say, listen, as professionals in this arena, we're saying, to the best of our knowledge, that it wasn't the neck restraint that caused this person's death. It was the totality. There's no doubt that the totality of the event, the incident, the pressure and the strain that it caused for Eric altogether definitely, you know, caused something that triggered, like I said, the cardiac arrest that the medical examiner said took place on the way to the hospital, which was terribly unfortunate. But I guess we're defending or we're speaking on a tool that has saved so many lives, and it's a shame to see, you know, the amount of media surrounding a man that was choked to death, when as professionals in the arena, we have all the reason to believe that it wasn't the choke, especially the fact that he was conscious immediately after the neck restraint was applied.
The moment we watched the video, we knew it wasn't this choke that did it. Now, when the autopsy came out, it verified everything.
It verified that at the very least there was no damage to the trachea, and the way that the officer was applying the restraint, he was applying it incorrectly with the bar of the arm across the trachea, there's no doubt. And we don't think he did so with an attempt to kill the suspect.
No, control.
We don't know, but we for sure believe, based on the fact that he released immediately once the suspect was compliant.
Well, that tells me right there. The fact that he only held it for as long as he needed it. He released it, so that was his whole objective, was control, bring the fight to the ground.
Correct. And that being said, based on our instructional standards, it was applied incorrectly. But even so, its incorrect application did not cause the damage that could cause from extreme pressure being applied to the front of the trachea.
So much force is necessary, so much strength to apply, to do that damage to the trachea.
Yeah, and far more pressure and strength and power is needed to damage the trachea and the throat cartilage than is needed to compress the, you know, the vascular systems of the brain and the neck running up into the brain. So, that being said, we do think that, you know, naturally, correct instruction, correct application of a vascular neck restraint is not only something that we definitely recommend and promote, but it's something that actually could save lives. There was an incident of an officer, student of ours, who got certified in the GST program, and it was a domestic violence call, went into the house, things went south, and the husband in the incident attacked the officer. It became a deadly force situation where this officer was fighting for his life underneath a much larger suspect who was attacking him very aggressively, unlike the situation we witnessed here. And the officer, you know, utilized his firearm and positioned the firearm into the body of the suspect to fire a round. The round did not go off because the slide of the gun pushed back, and it affected the firearm. It malfunctioned, and he dropped the firearm. At that point, he was in essentially a grappling scramble for his life. Was able to get behind the suspect and apply the vascular neck restraint, neutralize the threat, arrest the subject. The subject did not die. There was no permanent damage caused, and an officer's life was saved, and so was the suspect's in the same incident because of proper use of a vascular neck restraint. So we have too many stories like this where they're used safely and effectively to allow the general public to look at an incident like this and immediately condemn a technique, which, like any tool, can be used correctly or incorrectly, but ultimately, when used properly and when done with proper training and recertification and retraining, there's no doubt that it's at the top of the list in terms of, you know, intermediate force options, you know, weaponless or hand-to-hand force options for law enforcement professionals. And the definition, the police departments, for those civilians who don't know, the way it works in law enforcement is there's a use of force continuum, you know, from officers' presence, in terms of what they can use to deter the suspect and to prevent, you know, aggression and to ultimately carry out the arrest if necessary. And just officers' presence, verbal commands, you know, and then soft hand physical, guiding someone with your hands, and then intermediate, you know, tools and weaponless hand, you know, hand-on-hand combat. And then there's intermediate force option, which is tools like taser, baton, pepper spray, these things. And then it moves up into lethal force. And it's our belief that the vascular neck restraint, without question, should not be placed in the deadly force or lethal force category of the use of force continuum. Now, we respect the fact that each department places their tactics as they wish and as they see fit on the continuum. And we know of many departments that place the vascular neck restraint in the deadly force category, and they have the right to do that. However, no matter where the technique is placed, and the reason why we feel it's not deadly force is because the definition of deadly force is any tactic, tool, or method that is intended to or very likely to cause death, to kill the subject.
Right, and we've seen thousands and thousands and thousands.
Yeah. We've never seen
restraints
in jiu-jitsu and in the professional and in the fighting and in the martial arts side of things where we're very familiar, we've never seen a death from the use of one of these vascular neck restraints. Okay? Now, we respect each department's decision to place the vascular neck restraint wherever they see fit on the use of force continuum. However, it's our belief that even if it's placed as deadly force, which we don't think it should be, even if it is, officers need to be trained in its proper execution. Because even if it's placed in deadly force, like our friend and student who had to use it in the domestic violence call, even if it's placed in the deadly force level of the continuum, when you use it, it's much better if you can neutralize the threat without actually killing the person, right? And to ensure that, proper training and of course, you know, post-application medical procedures are necessary and need to be understood in order to make sure it's used wisely and safely.
So deadly force doesn't mean that you can't use it.
Right.
It just means that you can only use it
if someone's life or your life is in danger.
Correct.
And you go. But the reason, once again, seeing the studies that have been done and seeing the experience that we have and how many, you know, proper vascular neck restraints have been applied in jiu-jitsu and in martial arts, we have no reason to believe that it's likely or intended to kill the subject on which it's being used. That being said, in an arrest situation, there is no doubt that consideration must be given to these pre-existing medical conditions. The same way if we saw, an elderly person that was, violating the law and needed to be arrested, right? An officer has to take major consideration for the tactics used against that person when compared to an apparently extremely healthy, young, athletic individual. So each person has to be given a different level of consideration regarding their medical condition and their health of the individual. Now, in some cases, such as Eric Garner's, there's no way for the officers to have known that he was asthmatic, for example.
Well, even if he said, I'm asthmatic, man, you could kill me with one slap.
Yeah, the guy was so strong and so athletic that we don't know, what they used to determine the tactics that they used at that point. And we don't know what knowledge they had of the subject or not. We're just saying it's very difficult to detect these medical conditions from the outside. However, in cases where there is an obvious medical condition that definitely needs to be taken into consideration, there's no doubt that the officer is carrying out the arrest, and the degree of force that they use to carry out the arrest needs to be adjusted and taken into consideration these existing medical conditions to ensure that it's not excessive force for that particular circumstance. And once again, we don't know what the officers knew in Mr. Garner's situation, but we do know that we teach very specific techniques that allow officers to carry out arrests with the least amount of force possible. So when looking at this situation, not so much from a judgment of the past perspective, but from a recommendation for the future perspective, we do have some recommendations that we teach in the GST program that we wouldn't mind sharing with you guys now regarding how Hidon and myself or any of the officers that we've trained would carry out an arrest, a 2-on-1 arrest scenario against a resistant or at least a passively resistant subject in a situation similar to the one that we saw. And so, for example, Sam, come on up, please.
And this might also be a situation where you don't have all kinds of extra backup. There are only 2 officers.
Right. And we even teach situations where you're the only officer on the scene. But similar to the situation, let's say we have a multiple officer arrest situation, a suspect who, is, like I said, passively resistant, does not want to get arrested, but is not fighting back. You still have to take this person into custody. Ultimately, if they broke the law and you have to take them into custody right now, there are ways to do it with more or less force or violence, and we like to share one technique for a 2-man takedown that is similar to that. So Sam is the suspect. Typically, the officers try to approach the suspect that is under arrest, and while keeping a safe distance, notify the suspect, put your hands behind your back, on your knees, or whatever the situation might be. And the problem is, a lot of times, officers teach one person get in front, one person getting behind. The problem is this subject, more often than not, does not let us get behind him like this. Yeah, he does this. They're stand both, please, standing both. The whole time, you have someone who's literally addressing both. And officers have, often recalled incidences where they tried to surround and, get a front and back angle on the subject, but it's hard to do, especially when there's a wall, or they're using the wall, or whatever the situation might be. 2 officers, but he's going to keep us triangulated if he doesn't want to give his back. So if we come back this way a little more. So for example, if Hidon tries to get behind Sam right there, Sam's going to keep backing up and try to keep us both in view here and addressing both. So the challenge is that no one can get a free angle, an entry angle on the subject here. So what we suggest is that the contact officer, whoever the subject is facing at the time, right, during the communication here, engage the suspect upper body. So get hands on the subject, assuming that the cover officer, the secondary officer, couldn't get the back angle. Get hands on the subject. You can do that by blocking their arms, putting your hands in, bringing tricep hooks. You can do that by getting a neck and a tricep hook on the side that you're on right here, and just making a connection. And what that does is draws his attention into an upper body connection. Immediately, once I connect with the subject here, the cover officer would come in and would bind the legs together of the suspect. So when we connect right here, then Hidon will come in and hold the legs. Very carefully now, I'll place the subject on the ground. And that's a huge point, right? The idea that you hold his legs, and I'm upper body connected, and I can guide the suspect, right? If this is grandma to someone who's extremely overweight, to someone who maybe we know has Down syndrome or another medical condition that would affect how we would carry out the arrest, it is important to place them down carefully to the ground, because obviously the fall itself can cause injuries. Once we have the suspect down in this supine position, the goal is obviously to pronate them and to get their hands behind their back. And there are many ways to do that, and we teach different upper body procedures. Stand by. There are different upper body procedures you can use where you pry someone's arm over and get them down to their belly with the objective of getting their hand behind their back. And there are different degrees. If I was by myself, I would be more on top of Sam, controlling with my body weight. But in a case where you do have a multiple officer arrest situation, you have one person controlling the legs, one person upper body, we make sure that we're on the same side of the body. And at this point, while controlling the legs, go ahead, Hito. While controlling the legs, watch what Hito does real slow. He's going to bring his hand in. He's going to lace through the Sam's legs. Look at his knees, right at the upper knee, thigh area. And now he's going to use his shoulder and his whole body to pry him over. At the same time, I'm prying his arm over, getting his hand behind his back. Now, real slow. So watch what Hito does. He goes under the first ankle, over the second ankle, picks it up, hands it off to the bottom hand, and now watch this hand. Loops around, and then hooks onto their belt, their pants, and ultimately immobilizing the lower body of the subject here. By triangulating the person's legs and trapping it with his shoulder, this person can't get up to their knees, and Hito has great control. Now here's the key. At this point, we want to avoid putting too much pressure. If they have a medical condition that we're aware of, the less amount of pressure we put on the person's body, the better.
Well, you put what you need
to control the subject. Absolutely.
Like Sam, get up right now. Like Tanner, move. He
Sure.
doesn't need that much right now.
Because the leg control is so good, the body doesn't have to be compressed, you know, and restrict the breathing of the subject in any way. Because naturally, the more pressure you put on someone's lungs, the more difficulty they're going to have breathing. And someone who's extremely overweight, being positioned on their chest, just by having their own weight on their own chest, can make it hard for them to inhale when they're used to inhaling and breathing without that kind of pressure on their chest. So at this point, to minimize the amount of compression on the body, we would move into this north-south position here, and at this point, hooking one arm, using some kind of joint manipulations to gain compliance. Sir, hand behind your back, and when he brings the other hand behind his back, we're good. Hito at this point could reach back, get a set of handcuffs, come out, and then we could join each other and assist each other in the process of handcuffing here in a way that minimizes the amount of pressure on the subject. And again, all considerations being given to the amount of pressure and the amount of, pressure. Thank you, Sam. All considerations being given to the fact that, you don't want to aggravate any medical conditions this person might have. And, bottom line is, training saves lives, And I just think that that's kind of like, there's no shortcut to it. And we are in the profession of teaching law enforcement officers techniques, tactics, and arrest and control procedures with the objective of allowing them to use the least amount of force possible. We have a graph here that we'd like to show you guys that will help kind of make this connection. And kind of what's happening here is we have here a graph for you guys that shows the amount of force necessary to carry out the arrest is inversely correlated to the amount of technique and the comfort with those techniques that the officer has. So for example, if you have no technique, then naturally the lowest amount of technique, you're going to use the most amount of force right there. Okay? That's going to be very much excessive force because what happens when you don't know what you're doing? You panic. When you panic, you're fearful, and as being fearful and in a panic state, you're going to be overly aggressive in carrying out an arrest or in anything that you do. So the key to avoiding panic in any situation is to be more familiar and to have better technique in the situation. So as training time and as technique develops more comfort, the amount of force, bring the line here please, the amount of force is going to decrease, and eventually you get to a point where, minimal force is necessary to carry out the exact same arrest, right? Only because the technique is so calm and comfortable, situations like the one we just showed you, where you can carry it out without causing any unnecessary harm, damage, or aggravating any pre-existing medical conditions. And that's really what we wanted to talk to you guys about, is just to say, man, ultimately, it's an unfortunate situation that happened. There's nothing good about the incident. A family with 6 children lost a father. We lost a fellow human being. And these officers who were involved in the incident, their lives will forever be changed, based on how it went down.
The reason why we will never reach, it's difficult to reach that point on the graph where the officer knows so much technique and therefore can, apply so much less force, is because of the amount of hours that are dedicated to officers learning these techniques every year, compared to the amount of hours that officers spend learning to use firearms or their tools.
Yeah, it's crazy, and a lot of civilians don't know this, but the average training time for defensive tactics, which means self-defense, arrest and control procedures, hand-to-hand control tactics, the average training time in police departments across the country is 4 hours, 4 to 8 hours annually, every year, for a police officer to train and retrain the tactics that they would use in a hand-to-hand situation with an aggressive subject or a resistant subject. 4 to 8 hours a year. And in contrast, the amount of time that officers spend training with their firearms is often, 4 to 8 times that amount of time. So, 16 to, 32 hours a year, officers train qualifying and training with their firearm. But what's ironic is that, based on, statistics from my law enforcement, our law enforcement friends, over 99% of active police officers that will patrol the streets will spend their entire career without ever pulling the trigger in the line of work. Yet, over 99%, the same percentage of police officers working the streets will go hands-on to carry out an arrest once a week, twice a week, right? That's their job. They have to go into situations, the altercations, and solve the problem and carry out the arrest. So they're going hands-on 1,000 times more frequently than they're using their firearms. Now, we're not saying that there should be any less time training firearms. We're just saying there's an incredible imbalance in the amount of respect, training consideration, and time that's being given to defensive tactics training, to law enforcement and police departments around the country. And slowly, as more departments are introduced to these tactics and seeing what benefits they can give and how they actually work for professionals, they're modifying and they're increasing the amount of training time allocated for defensive tactics, seeing that, the reduced, use of force incidences that arise in a department that has adopted Gracie Survival Tactics. That alone is reason enough for other departments to jump on board and to make similar changes. But it's an uphill battle to get that change, to happen at different departments. Every department is on their own in terms of their training standards and requirements. So all we can do is continue to provide, the knowledge that we've been, developing and been given our entire lives. And once we've seen the results, we're going to keep pushing for that. And there are many departments who've had great success with the program, but ultimately it's going to be their choice, and it's going to take time, But ultimately, this training saves lives. That's what we're 100% sure of, and that's what we want to kind of promote and make aware.
Yeah. Even we personally, all of my training, my whole life, is so that if I do fight somebody in the street, I can protect them.
Right.
That person will be very well taken care of and controlled, and we'll all walk away. We'll all go home.
Yeah. So, like we said, we couldn't be more saddened by the fact that this incident had to take place the way that it did. But, if there's anything that we showed, anything that we mentioned, or any officers out there who learned anything from this video that would help them carry out their duties or enact an arrest with greater respect and consideration for the safety of both parties involved, and done so with the least amount of force, and if we can reduce the amount of force that any officer uses, then it was worth having this discussion for that reason alone. That's our crusade, that's our mission, is to ultimately keep the officers safe, but also keep the suspect safe. And like Hidon said, we believe that if we were to carry out any arrest, the suspect couldn't be in better hands than with Hidon and myself. We believe that 100%. And as we continue to train more officers and certify more instructors, we're spreading that message and that ability, that technical ability, to different departments around the country. We're very happy with all the certifications and people that we have reached so far, but we have a long way to go, and we're not going to stop until we reach everybody. So with this incident, in the wake of this incident happening in New York, we definitely want to help prevent this from ever happening again. And we've checked our records, and there is no record of us having certified any of the head defensive tactics instructors from NYPD. And that being so, we would like to take this opportunity to extend the invitation for any of the head instructors of the New York Police Department Defensive Tactics Training Team are invited to participate in any one of our week-long Gracie Survival Tactics instructor certification courses for the entire year of 2014. We have upcoming courses in Michigan, in Texas, here in Los Angeles, in Torrance at our headquarters, Louisiana. So we would be honored to have you guys partake in the course. And if you learn 2, 3, 4 techniques that could prevent this incident, similar incidences from happening in the future, or at least reduce the amount of force necessary to carry out arrests in your department, in your guys' city, then it would be worth our efforts. So anybody out there who is part of that DT training team in New York, please reach out to us, let us know, and we'll make arrangements to make it happen. We'll even fly you guys out so that there's nothing preventing you guys from getting the training that we provide and that we think really help the department. So that is the least we can do in the aftermath of an incident like this. But other than that, you guys, we thank you guys for listening. You know, our attempt to have this conversation is in no way, you know, us indicating judgment or placing judgment on the right and wrong of how the, you know, the arrest and the incident actually, you know, played out. Again, it was an unfortunate situation, incident for everyone who was involved. And, you know, we really thank you guys for being part of this discussion with us and for joining us and listening to what we have to say. And, you know, our deepest condolences out to the Garner family for their loss. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next time.